Fortunately, Krivax was correct about Masruk already being informed about their imminent adventure. When he arrived at the warrior compound, his friend was already fully geared and ready to leave. After quickly double-checking that they both had all the necessary supplies, the two of them left the compound and started making their way to the city's portal station. As the two of them made their way through the crowds of Nerubians going about their day, Krivax went over the route they would take and the potential dangers they might face. While they had already talked about it extensively, it was worth repeating. Krivax was not expecting the route to be particularly dangerous, but those expectations were built on research that was already centuries old and imperfect meta-knowledge. The worst things they should encounter before they meet the Tuskar are shovel tusks, which they should easily be able to handle, but one could never be too careful. Fortunately, the portal station was located relatively close to the warrior compound, so it did not take the two of them long to arrive. The building was guarded by armored guards and administrators could be seen inspecting anyone coming and going from the portals. Following the helpful signs that pointed them in the direction of the correct portal, Krivax and Masruk skittered past a few of the busier portals until they reached the correct location. The portal itself looked like a tear in reality with its edges illuminated with a violet outline. With his magical senses, Krivax could feel magic being diverted from the nearest ley line, through the building, and into the portal in a constant effort to keep it from closing. "Greetings, are you to initiate Krivax and Neophyte Masruk?" asked the bored-looking administrator, who was presumably assigned to this portal.
Yes,
we are," said Krivax, speaking for the both of them. Reaching into his spatial bag, he retrieved and presented his identification disc.
"I see," said the administrator as he inspected the disc with his magic.
"Barely anyone uses this portal aside from those assigned to maintaining the outpost, so your names caught my attention." The administrator spoke with a questioning tone, but Krivax simply pretended he couldn't hear it and responded with the Nerubian equivalent of a smile. Seeing that he wouldn't be getting any interesting gossip out of Krivax, the administrator seemed to lose any interest in the two of them and quickly finished processing them. Stepping through the portal was an incredibly strange feeling for Krivax. While the transition from one location to another was far more seamless than it would have been if he was teleported, the abrupt changes to all of his senses were still very jarring. From one moment to another, everything from the lighting to the air to the ambient magic was suddenly different. Krivax idly wondered which parts of the environment the portal was designed to filter as he and Masruk adjusted to the changes in their senses. After they finished adjusting, they once again presented their identification to an administrator and waited patiently as they were processed. After they were done, Krivax was surprised to hear that the outpost's gatewatcher had sent a warrior to escort them to the entrance to the surface. As the silent warrior escorted them through a dizzying maze of tunnels, Krivax could tell that the outpost was manned almost entirely by warriors. Soon enough, Krivax and Masruk were brought to the most heavily guarded portion of the outpost. The entrance to the surface was swarming with warriors and protected by a fearsome gatekeeper. Krivax had occasionally seen Spider Lords at various points over the past 4 years, but always in passing. The Spider Lords held positions as leaders, guardians, and enforcers of the law in Azjol Nerub society, so as a young initiate of the Circle of Viziers he'd never had reason to meet one in person. Until now, that is. The factors that determined the highly variable size of the Spider Lords were unknown to Krivax, but this one was truly massive. Standing at what he estimated to be at least 18 feet tall, the giant beetle-like Nerubian had a brown carapace that looked thick enough to shrug off any blade and 2 large scythe-like arms that could easily tear a fully grown man in two. As the giant Nerubian blocked the way and looked down at him with a searching expression, Krivax couldn't help but feel that both the Scourge and the Vrukul must be truly powerful to defeat such terrifying killing machines. "You must be Initiate Krivax and Neophyte Masruk. I am Gatekeeper Gruthib," said the Spider Lord in an extremely deep voice. "Vizier Hadix has secured your passage through these gates. Beware, young ones. The surface is teeming with danger, and once you pass this threshold your safety is nobody's responsibility but your own. Are you certain you wish to continue?" "Yes, Gatekeeper. We are certain," Krivax said with confidence. For a normal Nerubian, this would likely be a truly daunting moment, but all he felt was an eagerness to take his first look at Azeroth's sky. The Gatekeeper turned his gaze to Masruk, who simply responded with a silent nod of agreement. "Very well. Present your identification and I shall open the way." Krivax made to hand over his identification for the third time in the past few hours, only to hesitate.
He doesn't have any hands. How does he expect me to hand it over?
Just when he was starting to feel awkward, the sound of chittering at his feet drew his gaze downwards. A dog-sized beetle was wildly chittering at him and waving its two front arms in a grasping motion.
Krivax turned a questioning gaze to the gatekeeper, but the Spider Lord responded with nothing but an amused expression.
Well, okay. I hope I'm not about to make myself look really stupid. Crouching down, Krivax handed his identification to the beetle, who immediately grabbed it and skittered away toward the gatekeeper. Grubib spent a few moments examining this disc before turning to address his subordinates.
Open the gates.
Krivax watched the warriors open the gates as the beetle returned his disc. While the large black and gold gate was quite impressive, he couldn't help but focus most of his attention on the magic flowing through the walls. Krivax was not skilled enough with enchanting to understand what purpose the magic served, but his instincts told him that any attempted invader would find themselves quickly regretting their decisions. Without further comment, Gatekeeper Grubib moved aside with steps quieter than an 18-foot insectoid killing machine that weighed thousands of pounds should be allowed to have. Seeing no reason to delay, Krivax bowed politely to the Spider Lord and started making his way to the surface with Masrook.
Are you nervous,
buddy? Krivax asked his friend in an attempt to calm his nerves. While he should be feeling nothing but excitement, he had been working towards this for several years, and now that the moment was finally approaching, Krivax couldn't help but feel a little anxious.
This is a big deal, you know?
This is the first time we'll be on our own.
I believe you are more nervous than I am, Masrook said evenly.
We will protect each other, and if necessary we have both the emergency communication device if we need help and the scrying crystal for non-emergency situations.
Everything will be fine.
The emergency communication device was a magical tool that would send his location to Hadix along with a request for immediate assistance. The scrying crystal, on the other hand, would allow him to communicate with Hadix after performing a lengthy magical ritual.
Damn it, Masrook, aren't you actually 4 years old? Why are you so much more relaxed about this than I am?
The two of them made small talk as they climbed the winding tunnel upwards until suddenly, the two of them took a turn and laid eyes on the surface world for the first time in their lives. When Krivax saw the end of the tunnel open and saw the stars glittering in the night sky, he couldn't help but completely freeze. Only the impatient prodding of Masrook to move so he could exit the tunnel as well was enough to bring him back to reality again, as it truly hit him how he was on a completely alien world than the one he recalled in his first life, as evidenced by the 2 moons hanging in the sky. At least Masrook was soon struck by the alienness of the surface as well, if for a completely different reason. How high does the ceiling reach? He suddenly asked, honestly curious.
Those are celestial bodies, not crystals in a cavern ceiling. They can go on far beyond our ability to comprehend. He reminded him, still dumbstruck in his own way.
Of course. Masrook returned as they sat in a comfortable silence for a moment and simply took in the world around them.
Krivax, what is that?
Krivax looked to the sky in the direction that Masrook was pointing, only to see a giant eagle, far larger than any bird that could be found on Earth, flying through the night sky. If he still had the vision of a human, there would be no chance for him to spot the bird in the darkness, but Nerubian eyes were well adapted for the dark.
That is a duskwing eagle, said Krivax as he looked at the giant bird with faint awe.
Even after living in Azeroth for 4 years he was still easily affected by such fantastical sights. It still sometimes amazed him to see the various giant bugs, spiders, chawmongers, arachnithids, and other such creatures in the Empire. Is it dangerous?
Will it attack? Asked Masrook, gripping his spear tightly.
We're 2 giant spider people. I doubt there are very many predators stupid enough to attack us.
No, I don't think so.
As long as we don't threaten it I doubt it will bother us, Krivax said reassuringly. Once the two of them adjusted to their new surroundings, Krivax decided to take a look at his surroundings to see if he could find out which direction they needed to go. Fortunately, there were a few landmarks that gave him a decent idea of where he was, namely the Whisper Gulch that was visible from the tunnel's threshold. That location was understandably marked with notes that read "Do not enter" and "hazardous" on the map Krivax had drawn using a combination of the circle's research and his own meta-knowledge. The faint sound of waves, the scent of the ocean, and the occasional seagull also served to make the direction of the coast fairly obvious.
It only took a few minutes of walking in that direction for the two of them to reach the edge of the tall cliff that overlooked the nearby ocean. This triggered another long moment of dumbstruck staring that only ended when Masrook started to ask questions about the ocean. "So it's full of salt?" Masrook asked in astonishment. "How does anything live in it?" "They are built for it, just like we are for the underground." Krivax shrugged. Now that he knew the location of the ocean and the Whisper Gulch, it was only a matter of following the edge of the cliff until they spotted the ancient lift that connected the Isle of Spears to the rest of Northrend. Given they were both well rested, and it was still night time, it would probably be a good idea for them to both get moving. Unfortunately, Krivax was not quite certain how long it would take them to reach the village, so he had prepared a few supplies that would make the journey easier. Reaching into his spatial bag, Krivax pulled out 2 vials filled with a gold-colored liquid. Krivax was fortunate that he could earn a decent amount of money through magical silk crafting because stamina potions were truly not cheap. A part of him believed he would have enjoyed learning alchemy himself. But it was more important for him to prioritize his time. After handing one of the potions to Masrook, he opened the vial and quickly downed the potion in one quick gulp. Potions often tasted incredibly strange, so it was best to drink them as quickly as possible. Immediately after Krivax finished drinking the viscous liquid, he felt a surge of boundless energy that to him felt inexhaustible. Intellectually, he knew that the potion would only last for the night, but he still felt as if he could run at a full sprint for days. "Let's go," said Krivax after putting away the empty vials. "It'll be best if we travel as far as we can during the night while most of the animals are asleep. We can set up a nest in one of the trees after the sun rises." Once Masrook nodded his agreement, the two of them started to move at a quick pace while following the edge of the cliff. One thing that was definitely not captured in the Warcraft franchise was how quickly Nerubians were able to move due to their large size and multiple sets of legs, especially when they didn't need to worry about their stamina. Honestly, being a giant spider person who was larger than an adult human and also able to run nearly as fast as a horse had its benefits. As they traveled, Krivax did his best to answer Masrook's frequent questions. The young Nerubian seemed to be interested in everything, from clouds to trees to the random wildlife that hurriedly moved out of their way. For Krivax, it was interesting to see all the animals that were present in this location that did not exist in the game, from stuff that wouldn't be out of place back on Earth to things he didn't even have names for. After a few hours of running, Krivax had seen rabbits, dragonflies, a strange fox thing with tiny antlers, squirrels, a few deer, and even a herd of shovel-tusk grazing in the distance. Thankfully, it seemed that he was right to assume the wildlife wouldn't be stupid enough to attack 2 large predators for no reason. Like this, the two of them managed to cover a deal of great distance as they traveled the rest of the night without interruption. It was only when the sun started to peek over the horizon that their pace started to slow. While their potions still had a small amount of time before they ran out, the two of them could not help but be entranced by the sight of their first Azerothian sunrise. As the darkness abated and the animals began to grow more active with the early morning light, the two of them decided to find a tree they could build a nest in and use to get some rest. After all, it had been a long evening for the both of them. The terrain was mostly flat and not heavily forested, so they would likely be able to see any incoming danger regardless of which tree they chose. Seeing no reason to pick one giant tree over another, the two Nerubians made their way to a tree that resides on a small hill. As Masrook started to prepare their rations so they could have a quick meal once they finished spinning their web, Krivax began to inspect the tree in order to make certain no duskwing eagles had already made a nest in it. He had only just finished determining that the tree was unoccupied, and thus free for them to use, when he heard a strange bellow that sounded something like an angry boar. Startled, Krivax turned his attention to the direction the sound came from, only to see a large shovel tusk charging the two of them and several smaller ones behind it nervously huddling together. Krivax frantically began casting a frostbolt while Masrook charged spear first at the incoming stag. While the adult shovel tusk was very strong, it had no chance of standing up to Masrook and Krivax. Masrook's spear expertly kept the territorial creature at bay and Krivax's full-strength frostbolts constantly smashed into the shovel tusk's side and left it slow and injured. With a quick thrust, Masrook buried his spear into the side of the creature, causing it to collapse and spit out blood. By the time they put the shovel tusk out of its misery, the rest of the herd was already running off into the distance. "Good job, Masrook," said Krivax as he looked away from the animal's bloody corpse.
It was his first time killing another living being, and even if it was just an animal, he couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable.
It's fine. People go hunting all the time back on Earth. I already knew I was going to have to get used to stuff like this, so there's no point in making a big deal about it.
It was easy, said Masrook.
Krivax felt like he could hear some disappointment in his friend's voice. The shovel tusk was not very intelligent. It continuously charged into my spear even after such tactics failed already.
Krivax ignored his battle-hungry friend's disappointment and started to wrap the animal's corpse in webs so they would have an easier time dragging it away.
After all, it would be unwise to leave a corpse near where they intended to sleep when it could attract scavengers. Once the two of them pulled the shovel tusk an acceptable distance away, they quickly climbed up the tree and began weaving their temporary nest. When the tree was nearly fully covered in webs that would entrap any approaching predator, Krivax and Masrook unpacked their rations and turned to watch the sunrise. After they finished their meal and were preparing to go to sleep, Masrook decided to climb to the very top of the tree to see if he could spot any potential threats.
"Krivax, what are those?"
asked Masrook, interrupting Krivax as he was busy trying to make his sleeping cocoon more comfortable. With a slight huff of exasperation, Krivax climbed to the top of the tree so he could explain whatever this new sight was to his friend. For a moment, after he saw the strange shapes floating back and forth in the distance, Krivax had no idea what he was looking at until he suddenly remembered a particular Tuskar tradition. The Tuskar flew large kites over their settlements as a way of signaling their location to one another.
"Well, all right then. I guess we'll be making first contact faster than I thought."
Orpheus sighed wearily as the light of the morning peeked through the windows of his small home. He was reluctant to rise so early, but he knew he had a long day ahead of him and important responsibilities. The representatives from Cascala and Moki had just left, and Kamagwa needed to replenish its food stocks as a result. Orpheus understood that the elders felt it was important to throw a feast for visiting clans so they could demonstrate their capability, but they weren't the ones who would need to hunt the shovel tusks. Fortunately, they would only need to hunt the beasts as a temporary supplement until the fisherman managed to refill the village's food supply. Lifting himself from the comfort of his bed, Orpheus donned his whale-skin vest, grabbed his personal knife and spear, and made his way out of his house to face the day. As he took a glance around the ancient life outpost, he could immediately tell that his friend, Lunk Tusk, had already left to go hunting. Orpheus huffed in amusement. His friend would rather hunt alone than spend time looking after the younger hunters. He wasn't too worried though. Lunk Tusk was a highly capable warrior and was more than able to take care of himself. Ready to get the day started, Orpheus walked to the middle of the outpost and decided to wake up the young ones. "Wake up, short tusks!" bellowed Orpheus at the top of his lungs. "The sun is up and it's time to get moving. Teotka does not feed the lazy." Orpheus chuckled to himself as he heard the muffled curses of young men throwing themselves out of bed and frantically preparing for the day ahead. Soon enough, 4 young men with short and shiny tusks were lined up in front of him. After a short inspection, he was pleased to see that Rajopo, Hogak, Irayunot, and Motak had all managed to prepare themselves properly for the hunt. "Are you ready, short tusks?" asked Orpheus sternly. Even if they were not expecting any great danger, hunting, just like fishing, was something that should always be taken seriously. "I don't want any of you getting gored because you decided to do something foolish. Our people are counting on us to feed them, and your families are counting on you to come back home. I expect you all to follow my directions, am I clear?" He usually preferred to be more relaxed, but he had learned the hard way that it was best to be strict with young warriors who were barely more than calves. After receiving enthusiastic affirmations from the young ones, Orpheus nodded and started to lead them north. Their people were not best suited to travel quickly overland or for long distances on foot, but that was not a problem when it came to hunting shovel tusks. The stags were extremely territorial and would end up attacking anything that approached their herd's feeding grounds. All Orpheus needed to do was find a herd of shovel tusks, walk in its direction, and kill the stag that came charging at him. In Orpheus's opinion, hunting shovel tusks was far simpler than fishing, which was likely the reason why it was not nearly as respected and thus not worth many knots on one's counting staff. Even embroidery done by the womenfolk was worth more knots. Still, it was something that needed to be done. The only difficult part was actually finding a herd. Lunk Tusk had scouted a herd north of the outpost a few days ago, but they had already been walking for a while and were having trouble finding it. The lands were very flat, so Orpheus was surprised they had not spotted it yet. Orpheus was looking around and growing increasingly frustrated by the lack of shovel tusks despite having been walking for nearly an hour when his search was interrupted by Arayunot's yells. "Long tusk, what is that?" Orpheus looked in the direction Arayunot was pointing in and was immediately dumbstruck by what he saw. There was a tall tree peeking over a hill that was covered completely in spiderwebs. "Get behind me, now!" Orpheus barked at the younger warriors. There was no reason for there to be giant spiders this far from the Riven Wood, but there was always a chance something had driven them south. A Riven Widow was not itself difficult to kill, but its venom was a death sentence without immediate attention from a shaman. Orpheus had a faster reaction time and thicker blubber than the rest of his hunting party, so it would be best for them to stay behind him. After the short tusks were safely behind him, he gripped his spear tightly and carefully inched his way forward. With every step he took closer, Orpheus expected a giant spider to come charging down from the tree. Strangely, he managed to make it all the way there without incident, and even after circling the webbed tree, nothing attacked him. Orpheus felt his apprehension turn into confusion as he confirmed the tree to be empty. "There is nothing here," Orpheus said with faint confidence. The short tusks slowly calmed down and started to gawk at the tree with curiosity. "Prepare to head back. This needs to be reported to the elders." He hoped one of the shamans would understand what was going on, since it was quite odd for the Riven Widows to abandon a nest. Orpheus was about to lead the hunting party back to the outpost, and then to Kamigwa, when he was interrupted by a strange voice. "Greetings." Orpheus and his hunting party immediately brandished their spears and stood back to back. He frantically looked at his surroundings but was unable to spot the owner of the voice. Still, he pushed himself in front of his hunting party and pointed his spear toward the bushes to his left. After all, in such flat lands, there were very few places a person could hide. "Who are you? Show yourself, stranger." "I will," said the voice. They spoke slowly and their Kalu aka was accented in a way Orpheus had never heard before. "Are they a different race? Maybe a troll or a Tonka? Perhaps a human? But first, promise no attack." They were worried about being attacked? Orpheus allowed himself to relax as it looked less and less likely that their hunting party was about to be ambushed. "I promise, stranger. We have no intention of attacking you if you do not attack us. We Kaluak are a peaceful people." Orpheus expected the stranger to show themselves after being reassured, but they instead called out again with audible hesitation. "Remember, promise. We look scary." Orpheus barely held back a scoff. He was a fully grown warrior of Kamigwa. There was no chance of him being frightened to the point of violence by the appearance of some strange Tonka or troll. He was even less frightened by the appearance of the small, tuskless humans. "You need not worry, stranger," Orpheus said soothingly. "No matter what manner of creature you may be, we promise we will not attack you." After a few more moments of hesitation, the strangers finally walked out of the bushes and Orpheus almost made himself into a liar. As it was, he was able to hold back his instinctual reaction and focused his attention on stopping the screaming short tusks from throwing their spears in terror. "Calm down. Are you men or are you children?" After a lot of yelling, Orpheus was eventually able to calm down the short tusks enough that he didn't need to worry about them recklessly attacking the two giant spider creatures that could talk. Orpheus shot a quick glare to the short tusks and made it clear that he would be the one doing the talking. "I apologize, strangers. Your appearances are indeed a bit more startling than I expected," Orpheus said as diplomatically as possible. "I am Orpheus of Kamigwa. Who are you?" "I am Krivax," said the giant spider person who was wearing a robe made from some strange material. It then pointed to the other one next to it, which was wearing a set of metal armor and holding a spear. "This is Masruk. We want peace, not fight. We bring fish." Orpheus looked on in disbelief as the creature presented a fang-tooth herring to them within a net of more webs apparently, which made it clear who was responsible for the tree. He was feeling distinctly uncomfortable with how much of their language and culture the giant spider person knew. However, his sense of propriety did not allow any of this discomfort to show on his face as he accepted the gift. To deny a gift freely given, especially one that was sourced from the bounty of the sea through the hard work of another, would be a great insult after all. After the creature presented the fish,
The short tusks calmed down significantly and their expressions became much more curious rather than fearful. Orphus usually appreciated his people's kind and trusting nature, but right now it was his job to protect the young ones from a potential threat.
"Thank you for the gift, Krivax," Orphus said politely. The armored one seemed content to allow his companion to do all of the talking, so he directed his words to Krivax. "I hate to be rude, but I have to ask. What are you, and what are your intentions?" The fact that this creature was able to speak Kalu aka and presented them with a peace offering in the form of a freshly caught fish meant that they had not approached his people by accident. "Our people are called." The giant talking spider thing then started to speak in a strange skittering language, yet somehow, Orphus was able to understand the general gist of what it was saying. Was this some kind of magic? Apparently, these creatures were called Nerubians. Orphus did not know what a Nerubian was, or if he would be able to pronounce the strange word, but it was not his responsibility to know such things. Orphus hoped that the elders knew something about these creatures, or perhaps one of the shamans would be able to contact an ancestor who had experience with them.
"We want peace, trade,
friendship. No fighting."
Orphus carefully considered the creature's words as the short tusks continued to lose their sense of wariness about the strange creatures. If these Nerubians were approaching his people in a diplomatic manner and with the intention of fostering friendship and trade, then this was something that could only be handled by the chieftain. A part of Orphus wilted at the idea of how much hunting he would need to do if their village hosted more diplomats after the last ones had just left, but he knew he would do whatever his village required of him. Right now, the best way to handle these strange creatures was to learn as much as he could about them before he spoke to the elders.
"I mean no disrespect, Krivax, but I know nothing about you or your people. I need to seek the wisdom of our people's elders before I can allow you to approach our village." "Understand. Not problem," said Krivax. The Nerubian then seemed to hesitate before speaking quickly in its harsh language. Whatever magic the creature was using to translate its intentions sent Orphus feelings of understanding and a desire to show him what they had brought to trade. Krivax also promised not to approach their village or outpost without their permission. "All right, if you would like to show us what you have brought to trade, then I'm willing to take a look and tell our elders when I speak to them." Orphus was not sure how much of what he said was understood by the creature, but he hoped that their strange magic would work both ways. Krivax reached into a bag that they had been carrying over their shoulder, and Orphus was once again astounded as more of their arm disappeared into the bag than should be possible. It was starting to become clear to him that these Nerubians were capable of feats of magic that the shamans were incapable of. Orphus tensed as the Nerubian started to pull something out of the magical bag, but rather than it being a weapon-like part of him was expecting, it seemed to be a large roll of silk. The giant spider people want to trade with silk. At least that makes sense. By the time the Nerubian was finished retrieving their trading goods, Krivax had pulled out several rolls of silk in various different colors and an assortment of metal ores. Orphus was feeling a bit out of his depth. He was a warrior, not a blacksmith or a seamstress. Still, he would do his best to evaluate these goods so that he could present the elders with as much information as possible. "Can you explain what these are?" Orphus said respectfully. "I am not familiar with these items." "Yes. Can explain," Krivax said eagerly. They then started to speak in their native language as they described the use of each of the objects. Once they were done, even somebody as unfamiliar as him with the work of a seamstress could understand how valuable these silks were. By Islaruk, if what they said is true, then the reinforced silk could be used to make nets and ropes that would completely change how their people fished. They even had silks that were able to heat anything that they touched. This could be used to make clothing that would protect the more vulnerable members of their community during the particularly harsh winters. Orphus could not immediately think of a use for the colder silk, but he was certain somebody in their village would find it useful. When Orphus asked about the ores, he learned that they were all rather ordinary metal ores that his people were able to produce in great quantities because they apparently lived underground. Orphus was torn between feeling extreme horror at the thought of a race of giant spider people living beneath his feet, and glee at the thought of cheaper metals that could be used to make tools and weapons. These Nerubians must be extremely confident in their capabilities if they were willing to carelessly trade away metal ores. Orphus looked at the younger warriors who were busy gawking at the silk and ores, and couldn't help but feel that the events of today would be worthy of being carved into their tusks. Orphus spent the next few minutes asking clarifying questions, which the Nerubian answered patiently. It was a bit difficult for them to communicate complicated ideas due to the language barrier, even with the spider people's strange magic, but they were able to muddle through. When he was done, Orpheus asked the two Nerubians to wait by the webbed tree for them to return as he left to go speak to the elders. Krivax agreed and also offered to give him a shovel-tusk stag for them to bring back to his people. That explained why we couldn't find the herd, he thought to himself as Orpheus accepted but told them that bringing back the corpse would slow them down too much and that they would collect it later. After Krivax agreed, Orpheus bid the two Nerubians farewell and started to drag his hunting party back to the village as quickly as possible. To think that there was such a people living in Northrend that we didn't know about. Hogak spoke in wonder. As my father says, the world is wider than we will ever know, Motak followed up. I wonder what it is like living underground. It seems like a good way to avoid blizzards, but I think I would miss not seeing the sun or stars after a while, Rajopo mused. You think they honor spiders like we honor walruses as reincarnated ancestors? Maybe they can even talk to them like the shamans do. Irayunop wondered out loud. The four short tusks continued to converse among themselves about their first contact with a race that no one, as far as Orpheus knew at least, had even heard of and what they might be like. Orpheus let them since he was wondering quite a lot himself, and there was clearly no longer a need to be silent on this hunt-turned-diplomatic meeting. As they hurriedly made their way back, Orpheus couldn't help but wonder how he was going to explain this to the elders. It was a good thing he had 4 other witnesses as well as the web net containing the fangtooth herring. He doubted anyone would believe him when he told them what he saw otherwise.